So I would like to offer the word to anybody who wants to make any kind of comments, any kind of questions to anyone of this morning speakers. And so please feel free. Everybody has a microphone in their desk. You just need to switch it on so everybody can hear. So the floor is open. Okay.
A comment? Ooh, working? Yeah. In my experience with using the Orca Saver and noise deterrents, pretty much exactly what you've described, John, is that initially they worked and then the whales sort of cottoned on and came in regardless. We still use ours. We have it on board, and it's part of our mitigation, part of our toolbox, I guess. But what I believe is that if we put it in the water when the whales have turned up, it's too late. I'd try something else at that stage. So what I tend to do with the Orca Saver anyway is if I believe there are whales coming, and sometimes I'll know because I talked to my mate and he had the whales and they disappeared, and I look at the map and I think, oh, we're next, you know. So we'll put our Orca Saver in the water when we start hauling a line, when there are no whales about, assuming that as they swim by they'll hear that terrible noise and keep on going to the next boat or somewhere else. Maybe they'll go and feed on something else. So that's sort of my mindset anyway with how I tend to view the Orca Saver. It's good to have it, and I think you know, once the whales have already swam to the boat, they're going to feed whether it's on or not. But if we can deter them from 4 or 5 miles away, fantastic, it's done its job. It's very hard to quantify. We never really know if it's working or not, but it's just another tool to have. So that's as far as that. One thing that I've tried a lot in the last couple of years is hauling faster, which we're talking about too. But I have a system using a release device, so the line is kept tight when it's set, it sinks on the bottom, and disconnects so that we can haul fast from each end. It works quite well. It's simple. It's just a matter of a tube, and the 2 lines are frozen together in our blast freezer. So that the crewman will take it out of the freezer and tie it on the line. It sinks to the bottom, the ice thaws, and the line comes apart, and we haul it. That's quite handy at times too, depending on where we're fishing. If it's on a feature, usually on a feature, when we have a lot of fish on 2 magazines, it's good to have you know, that part of the line come up really quickly. And usually when you get to the end of a line, the line's hanging straight up and down, the whales are very confused, I guess. The dynamics of the line change, and often they will leave the last end of a line. So I rely on that to try and confuse them really.
Get into more details on that tomorrow as well, not just the new device, but what you're describing is the exact same thing as other fishermen using the Orca Saver with the best success explain as well.
Yeah,
you know,
not necessarily when they're alongside.
Hey, excuse me, speak with the microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll repeat it. I'll repeat my answer. Yes, what you are describing and the way you deploy and use your Orca Saver is identical to the other vessels that are still using the device with some success. And when it comes to the hauling speed, I will also mention that tomorrow in tomorrow's presentation, yes.
Okay. Who else? Paul.
Here? Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually happy that to hear about captain experience, because the holding speed ID came directly from a captain from the French fishery. I was actually aboard with him, and he said, yeah, it does work on some conditions, and one of the main conditions is that there is fish underneath. That's really dependent upon the number of fish, and that makes sense. I mean, if you got large numbers of fish in a very short part of the line, you got high density of fish, and the whales, definitely the time it takes them to grab the fish, get back to the surface, consume the fish, and then get back in there, depending on the number of individuals you have around the boat, it definitely has an effect. I haven't mentioned the negative effect of holding the line at higher speeds, and in case that there are a lot of fish on the line, yeah, on the factory vessel, they quickly get too many fish aboard, and it's hard to process after that. The other negative effect of that would be that you may lose some fish, especially the big ones, and the captain was trying to actually adjust the speed depending on the size of fish that would come up out of the water. We are aiming at quantifying this loss, if there is a substantial additional loss of fish compared to what is actually saved from depredation. Yeah.
One of the other things that we do occasionally is set a line, but only with one end on it, and we can adjust the weight or the anchor on the other end to drag along the bottom. One of the problems we have when we cut a line on the bottom and haul it back, often it'll drag on the bottom, and you lose fish that way as well, and then it also upsets the fishing spot. Normally we might go to a spot like that and work it for 3 or 4 days and get X amount of fish. But if you do it wrong, as every fisherman will tell you, you might only get 1 day out of it. So, and then you're defeating the purpose. But once again, it's just something to mix up and try. But we do set lines with only one end over a known feature, so that we can haul the anchor off the bottom and then quickly pull the other end back before the whales get it, or pull it from a different angle. So yeah, just different things to try.
Sorry, Jan?
It's on. I don't know how to turn this on.
Yeah, keep pushing.
Oh, it's good.
So, do your whales go after spit-offs when the fish pop off the line? Do they go after those? Do you know if they're...
I don't think we've noticed that. We can't see that.
Oh.
The toothfish, they all sink. They don't come to the surface. They don't have a swim
Okay.
Is that what
Yeah, it's like when you're hauling your gear, sometimes the fish aren't hooked very well, and they just spin off. So, but you haven't noticed the whales going after those.
No, we can't see them because the toothfish that come off just go straight down. They don't come to the surface. So.
And I think, Paul, that's what you're saying, is that there's an increased number of spin-offs when you're hauling faster, right?
We have released toothfish with a tag in, and have seen them taken by killer whales. So obviously we avoid releasing tagged fish when there are killer whales about. And seals also come up to the surface with a fish that's just been tagged and released 5 minutes before. But I'm sure sperm whales take tagged fish as they're fishing, swimming to the bottom too. So this all upsets the science and everything. So.
Right, and in the video, that was basically a spin-off that the whale went after. So when he was going towards the hook fish and then the spin-off, he was creating tension, and he popped the fish off, probably due to the tension on the line because it wasn't hooked very well. And he took off after the spin-off rather than getting the fish off the line. So that's what it looked like. He was making some decision there. So, and when you say that you're 4 to 5 miles away and the Orca Saver is on, are you pretty convinced that it's due to the Orca Saver that they didn't come near your vessel, or?
It's very hard. A lot of it with us fishermen is the mindset. You know, if you think you're winning the battle, you can get through the day and carry on. So it's very important to have you know, you use your tools. But yeah, I think so. I'm sure that we've you had our orca saver in the water and orcas have swum by.
Have you acoustically listened to see if you can detect the orca saver at 4 to 5 miles?
We haven't tried yet. We'll be very keen to do that though. I'm sure they can hear it. We can hear it through the ship. It keeps our engineers on his toes in the engine room. That's how we know it's working.
Yeah, I don't know, so I don't know. So I'm just curious if that
I'm
what
sure
it sounds
they'll
like.
hear it. Yeah.
I guess if they didn't field trials, how far away you can hear it is detected?
Yes, hearing it, I am not sure how far, but we've noticed, or the feedback from a lot of the vessels have been, when it's been working, they have moved anything from 400 meters up to 1,000 meters away from the vessel. But that's after, you know,
right.
they've already been around the vessel, and this was the first feedback we received. So it's, I can probably find out, you know, it's probably just a formula, I would assume, with the frequencies. And of course, it's very different, as a lot of you already know, weather and the water and the bubbles and everything plays a huge effect on how sound travels.
Right, sea state, yeah.
So
everything.
under some conditions, I'm sure they'll go many miles, and other conditions not. Yeah.
We had an interesting situation in South Georgia this last season. A very large iceberg grounded, and it was like 30 miles long, and it went aground and continually broke up all season. So you saw the pictures there. So the noise that's generated by that happening fascinates me. And we found when we were fishing close to the icebergs, and of course they were in 400 metres and shallower where the berg had grounded, we were just outside that on the shelf. And we had far less sperm whale activity around there than we normally did for that particular period of fishing. Whether or not we were protected a wee bit by the noise of the ice, they couldn't find us as easily, maybe, I don't know.
You were in
But,
shallower
it was interesting.
water, right?
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
I would like to, I don't mean to be rude, but I will like to avoid this dialogue and give other people opportunities. I'm sorry to interrupt this conversation, but the time is short, and I'm sure all other people want to know about other subjects. If nobody comes with a question, I would like to make a question myself, open to every one of you. I have heard this morning very carefully to everyone, and it seems that everywhere in the world we have, I mean, at least the fishermen, we have the sensation or the reality that orcas or killer whales are increasing the predation. The predation seems to be perceived like something relatively new and growing faster and faster. What is the explanation for that? Is because there are more orcas? That was the easiest thing we thought here in Chile. We didn't have much orcas before, and now we are infected. You know? So, and or they are learning how to interact with the fisheries. Everyone who wants to make a comment?
I have one comment, and this just sounds, I actually forgot to mention this in my presentation. In Western Alaska, there were reports of killer whales depredating the Bering Sea as early as the 1960s, so with the Japanese longliners. So this is kind of, as far as I understand, these are some of the earliest reports you hear of these interactions. So in the case of Western Alaska, it's actually not that new, but we are still currently seeing some increasing trends of depredation by killer whales on the survey. Not so much on the commercial fishery, but we can't tease out that time trend very clearly. But some of the management factors is something to think about. How we're fishing and utilizing the fishing grounds is clearly playing a role in the frequency of the interactions that we're seeing today. And so, that's one thing that comes immediately to mind. For us, it's been length of season has also been a huge factor. We're on the grounds more, and it gives the whales more opportunity to learn the behavior. So, and then with some of these newer fisheries that have been established in the last 20 years, this opportunity is available all of a sudden, and they're incredibly smart animals. And, it's again, it almost seems inevitable, sadly, unless we get more clever.
Yeah, but do they call other families?
Sorry, what?
Do they call other families? If you find that this orca thing for us has 10 years, so orca maturity are 30 years. So there is no way that they've been. So orca must come from somewhere. So let's say that one family find out how all the other families or ecotype knew about that. So that there must be a communication or something, no?
I think observational learning and spreading is something that's clearly contributing in a lot of, in especially some areas with higher populations of killer whales. There's such a possibility for dissemination of that behavior, cultural transmission, whatever you want to term it. And then, of course, there is within pods, within these families, from the matrilineal grouping, and then you can just see it being passed on to younger generations. And so there's, just so much opportunity for that.
So, Paul?
In lots of other depredation situations in the world, and I mean in marine environment or terrestrial environment, there are a number of studies that show that the predator, for example, a lion, is going to start depredating on livestock, on cows or sheep or anything, I don't know, in periods of low resource abundance. That means there are periods of the year where this predator is having more trouble to find its food. So there is a strong seasonality effect. Regarding the question of Eduardo, those predators are long-lived animals. The fishery is quite recent. It's in most cases you gotta head back to the 1990s. So it's very unlikely that those populations are actually growing. There are more and more whales in the population, but it's more likely than yes. Either the same individuals are starting to interact more and more with the fisheries, either there are more individuals within the population that are actually learning this new behavior. But what is interesting in that looking at all these presentations is that in very different fisheries got similar patterns. There is always a subset of individuals that seem to be responsible for most of the interactions. And what we observe is that some others are very, very opportunistic in depredation. That is, there is a fishing vessel working nearby. That's easy food. That's something easy to catch. I'm going to go there, but I'm not going to go look for vessels that are doing my time, And other whales are maybe specializing into that behavior. And I think, skippers do observe that as well.
Just a quick comment. I firmly believe that sperm whales and killer whales definitely seek our attention, not only for feeding, but just for company, and they're connecting with us, and we can. I've noticed that more and more, and not necessarily always feeding, and they're coming to us in areas where they don't traditionally forage by themselves, so there's not much there for them other than us. So I do believe they're actually coming to say hello.
In fact, I had another question. How do orcas or sperm whales look at us? There are many different behaviors when they start depredating. For example, we have one observation that a big male came in front of the vessel, like challenging or stopping it, while the other orca were depredating. that was a unique observation from one group in particular. So it's very. So we start thinking, what do they see? They see just the vessel is one whole thing. Does it have, for their eyes, has life? Or we were just talking at the lunchtime when Spanish people arrived to America. Indians thought that the horse and the mister were the one unit. So do orcas think of a vessel one unit, or one alive unit with this little, I don't know, fleas around? So maybe it goes, the behaviors. I didn't hear anything about behavior during the interpretation, so maybe it goes in that line.
I was fascinated. I think there was a photograph up there before. It might have been from your presentation. There were 5 whales lined up side by side. I've seen that on 3 occasions, and it's usually when there are killer whales. So the sperm whales line themselves up between my ship and the killer whales in a row. It's almost like they were protecting us from the killer whales. But it's interesting. I saw that photograph. I thought, wow, I've seen that before.
They were protecting their lunch, not your vessel.
Excuse me, Adil. You have the word.
Hello. Something that I was wondering about as well with this is, what are some of the other correlates that might be happening in parallel with this increase in killer whale or orca depredation? So have there been changes in the environmental conditions off the south of Chile recently? Have there been changes in the state of other stocks that orcas might be using as a prey source? So, for example, squids and other demersal fishes that they might be eating instead of hanging around toothfish vessels. And has there been any sort of attempt to look at that sort of broader ecosystem context or broader food web context for what other choices orcas could be making if the toothfish vessels weren't there? Because it does seem strange to me that such a strong change has happened in a short period of time when, as Paul was saying, it's not that they're not like bacteria that they can breed to take advantage of this new resource so quickly. So they must have come from somewhere. They must have been eating something else before that. So what is it that's changed? And it might be worth looking sort of more broadly, other fisheries, some of the environmental conditions, and those sorts of things. It may be that in a few years' time, I don't know what the influence of things like El Nino and that sort of thing are in this area, that if other more ephemeral species like squids all of a sudden have a big year, then the orcas may leave your boats alone and go and eat squid instead for a while. I was just wondering if anybody has any information like that, or whether there's likely to be anybody that you can talk to that's looking at that broader ecosystem where you're fishing, that might be able to help you understand that.
I think there was a huge boom in the squid fishing in the Falklands, 2 seasons ago? Last year. It was unprecedented. And I don't think there's much change in the behaviour of sperm whales or killer whales because of that.
Sorry, Marta, over there.
Hello, 1, 2.
Yeah.
Sorry. And I think when I gave a presentation, one thing that might have come across quite strongly is how keen we are on getting these isotopes analysed, because understanding what these animals eat naturally will help us understand why they start depredating. What is it? What has changed in the availability of the resources that they suddenly then think depredation is the better option? What I also wanted to point out is that depredation isn't increasing everywhere around the world and at the same rate. So around South Georgia, for example, we have 2 main depredating species. There are others as well. But the orca depredation has been relatively stable. In fact, it's been actually dropping slightly. And I'm not sure whether that's due to the measures that are being put in place, or the way the population itself has developed. On the other hand, the spermal depredation is something that we see as the up-and-coming problem. And here we have to bear in mind that sperm whales were a species that was hunted and is no longer hunted, so maybe we're looking at the consequences of that recovery? We don't know yet.
Yeah, there is some evidence. I mean, you've seen the Crozet situation. We've got very, very high levels of depredation. And we've been doing a lot of thinking about that. Why is that? Why do we have such a big issue of depredation there? I think that's a combination of factors. The first one is that we got small fishing grounds. It's a very localized fishing activity and very predictable. That is, the whales, for them, it's actually a very small scale environment. But we think the main factors, the main driving factors are really the natural resource. And we know those whales are feeding on other things, seals for example, and those populations of seals have been dropping tremendously over the past 50 years. And you'll see that part of the population is actually declining, the killer whale population, because they are relying on the resource. But also, maybe the illegal fishing activity, which has been impacting the Patagonian toothfish stocks, may also be a driving factors. I mean, those whales possibly were already feeding on toothfish before the fishery started, and this created some kind of scarcity for that kind of resource. And we see this prey switching, which has danger in it. They're going to interact with the human activity, and they got shot by illegal fishing for a while, but they kept doing it. So you kind of wonder, these guys are smart animals, why don't they stop doing it? It's risky, there is danger in interacting with the fisheries. Maybe not anymore, but still, why back in the 90s they kept doing it? And it's possible that they were looking for food, and this human activity, the fishery, in a way saved the population. I mean, some whales started to switch because, yeah, desperately, there was probably an additional food resource during a period of low resource scarcity. So regarding Chile, I agree with Dirk that possibly there is some environmental factor of other type of fish, I don't know, other prey that may be contributing to that increase. Yeah.
Marta on the back.
Sorry, I think Paul just touched on something that we've all been sort of skirting around, but nobody really pointed out, and that's the predictability of the fishery as well. So in the first years, and like you said, these are relatively young fisheries. When you're prospecting, you're probably fishing a bit more broader, which makes it more difficult to guess where you're going to be. But maybe one thing to do is to look at how your fishing patterns, your fishing behavior has changed over the years, and whether that brings you in a situation where you're always in the same area at the same time, which makes it quite easy for the whales to find you.
John?
Just a quick comment. I don't know your fishery well enough. Have you given the whales more opportunity with new emerging fisheries, or as the fisheries stay static? I don't know if you have new fisheries or not, so.
What do you mean by the dynamic or the static fishery?
So you're having increases in whale numbers with a static fishery, is that right?
Oh, the mic.
I think that the most important variables that I can think of stay probably the same. For example, one thing that changed was 1 year when the new fishing law started. We had here in Chile and the southern no other vessel fishing but ours, just one. It used to be normally 8 vessels or 5 vessels. This time was just one. And orca waves, the crew members reported an aggressivity they never saw before on an orca whale. They practically get into the vessel to get the toothfish out of the line. So it was almost danger for crew members. But that was one change that I can really hit the behavior of orca.
Chris?
Just to try and answer your question a little bit, Jan, Dirk might be able to help me moving back further in time, but the last 5 years or so, the global toothfish catch has remained relatively stable at between 23 and 26,000 tonnes globally. Dirk might be able to help out with a bit more of the history of the Kamlar fisheries and if that fleet has expanded into different areas over the, say, the last 10 or 15 years. Not really.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that the big variation in toothfish catches globally is a lot due to the changes that have happened in Chile. I mean, the change from, and also the decline in IUU catches in the Kamlar area. So the IUU catches in the Kamlar area were, you know, at times, you know, 4 to 7 times the legal catch. But then also that, you know, the decline in the Chilean fishery and also the Argentine fishery is a big driver of the changes that we see in the overall catches of toothfish around the world. The Kamlar fisheries have been relatively stable over the last few years. I mean, the biggest bumps that we've seen, I mean, Hemi sort of went up quite a bit, but then it's come back down again. Ross Sea's been reasonably stable. South Georgia went down a little bit, but it's sort of starting to creep back up again. So, I mean, and Kerguelen's been, you know, it's had a fixed TAC for a long time now. So, yeah, the big changes that we've seen have been mainly in the EZ fisheries around South America.
And did that effort shift to somewhere else? I guess you're catching the same number of pounds, but it sounds like where they're being caught is different.
Yeah, so as Dirk touched on, a couple of the fisheries have gone up, a couple have gone down. Yeah, I did miss the IUU fishery between the mid-90s to the mid-2000s was basically now a complete removal of those 30-odd thousand tonnes per annum of illegal fishing as well.
I think one of the things that I've noticed with our operation, because of the whales in the last 3 or 4 years, is that our catch per unit effort is pretty stable, but what's going up is the effort. The best way to describe it probably 5 years ago, we averaged around 21,000 hooks per day in the South Georgia fishery. Now, last year, we only averaged just about 15,000. So with the same, yeah, so there's a big change in effort, even though our CPU is similar. It's taking us longer to catch our fish because we are running from Wales and moving around with buoying lines off, we're steaming over there 30 or 40 miles, we're coming back. So that's sort of a different balance, but the fish are still there.
I have a question that just is, I'm just from listening to, this is a just open-ended question, I have no opinion, but
Yeah, absolutely.
from listening to the discussion, there has been some speculation about environmental factors and management factors, but no sort of key answer. So does that mean that from most of your experiences that you think that social transmission and learning is one of the primary culprits? I don't know if anybody has an opinion or is willing to speak that far to it.
I really don't know, and I don't have an answer for that, but there are some places that we used to fish, they were very good places to fish, and now we cannot go anymore. So, before there were no orcas, now they're full of orcas. And you say, okay, all those orcas arrived because of the fishery, but we're not fishing there anymore because there are still orcas. So, time to time, a fishing master says, okay, I will try it. He goes there and get kicked out by orcas. So I think that learning, but my question about learning is, okay, one makes the learn and he learns and goes to talk to family and whatever, but why the same phenomena can be found in every place in the world? And in fact, here in Chile, I can imagine how the communication flew so fast from north to south, so from the different families. I can't think that it was one messenger or someone sent an email, but that went from family to family saying that. So one discovered it, okay, that family is sitting, and the second family, and the third family. And you say, okay, maybe they start getting together, male and female, all together, making new families. But if you take the time, there is not enough time to make all those new families.
Warwick?
Thank you, Eduardo. Not sure if I got this on. Yes.
It's working.
I have a question as well, but just before I ask it, I had made some notes earlier before Jan's presentation, final presentation, and I concluded that from earlier in the talks that we needed to perhaps create some diversions. What work has been done on creating diversions. And then, of course, Jan presented about the diversion, the decoy, and I thought that was very pertinent. But also, which has been brought up, is the lack of depredation in the Ross Sea and the Hemi area, and Heard Island area. And so I'm curious as to what the reasons for that might be.
To take answer that.
I can't answer your question about Heard Island, but our thoughts are that perhaps it is that subantarctic, or the Antarctic polar front that passes between Kerguelen and Heard. Maybe you've got an opinion, Paul, on that as well. I think it's also a timing thing. So we have noticed more whales in the last 5 years, which does coincide with increasing longline presence over a longer period of time throughout the year as well. The French, for example, are fishing 11 months of the year with 6 vessels, I believe. 7 vessels. So that's almost a full year complement of available easy fish, whereas maybe they just haven't learnt that we're doing the same thing a bit further south. Not too sure. Paul?
Yeah, well, we are actually getting to the same point, is why, in some cases, the whales don't learn how to decoy on long lines, and in some others, why do they do it? For the case of the Australian fisheries, we believe it's also a combination of ecological features of those sperm whale populations. You've seen that over years they tend to come back exactly to the same spot. So it's possible that around Heard and McDonald we actually have no idea of how many sperm whales are there and if these are actual feeding grounds for those sperm whales. So it's possible that the number of sperm whales is much lower than the Kerguelen Island, and there are some oceanographical variables for that, and the polar front is one of them. It's right in between Kerguelen and Heard Island. For the Ross Sea, it's actually a big question, because from other studies, we know that the killer whales, there are at least one type of killer whales that is in the Ross Sea, in big numbers of whales. They do eat Antarctic toothfish naturally. It's actually a primary prey item for them. And there is a big fishery going on over there. So why didn't they switch to depredation? They know this fish as a food resource, so there is no cultural, effects on that. And still, right now the situation is controlled, but there might be also a seasonality effect, and that's one of the effect we're raising for the Heard Island. It's possible that in their ecology there are some periods of the year where they are switching to another prey and leaving the area. We don't know. It's always the same question. Yeah, what do they eat without the fishing vessels? Yeah.
So Marta in the back.
So just a comment on the Ross Sea, because I actually looked at that a bit more in detail. The situation you have in the Ross Sea is also that the fishery and the orca distributions don't necessarily match. So you have a few spots where you have both, but for the majority of cases, these two are not spatially overlapping yet. I can't speak for the future. So the other thing I'm thinking, and I don't even know whether there's any truth to this or whether it's just a stupid thought, I don't know, but maybe the ecotype that you're talking about might play a factor as well in whether you're an orca that's going to start depredating or not. So the ones that we know around South Georgia and other areas are the ones that are very, very clever in terms of getting their prey, and they're quite flexible in what they can eat. As you take a crozet-like whale as well, has a wide range. And maybe that plays a role in being inquisitive and being more able to detect these new resources rather than being somebody who's very specialized on one particular resource. I don't know.
By the way, Marta, I think you said this morning that cachaloteras cannot be used in, and trot lines cannot be used in Camera because you cannot tag the fish. It was you or not? I don't remember.
I didn't say that they cannot be used. They can. I mean, it's up to whichever.
No, but you
region
said
you're in.
you cannot tag the fish if you do cachaloteras. And we are tagging our fish here with no problem. So
Again, it depends. I think it depends how you use it. When we've trialed it in around South Georgia, we had issues with the fish not coming up in a condition that was suitable for tagging at the tagging rate that was necessary, because we have quite high tagging rates in some areas.
yeah,
But there might be areas where that's different and that works differently.
you tried that in South Georgia a few years ago. Yeah, maybe the thing has improved. But okay, sorry.
Just wanted to add something about the decoy. Sometimes here, fishing master from different companies, from Pescasí, Sneope, or Dedis now, they mess together and go to one place.
We're running out of questions. What about my friend the Chileans? They are so quiet in the back. No questions?
I wouldn't like to talk too much about the lack of killer whales in the Ross Sea, because they're probably listening. And they're coming.
Okay, so I think we are done for today. We finished 10 minutes earlier.